morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this 10th annual forum of the Public Affairs Forum of India. Ajay has already introduced, and we have had an idea about PAFI, so I'm not going to go into that. I'll straight go into the first session, which will be moderated by Javed. And I think we have 4 outstanding speakers here in terms of Aniket, Ashish, Irina, and Karthik. Vivek, of course, my colleague here, would be doing the vote of thanks. The first session, we thought we should keep it broad. Javed said that it, of course, is pretty broad, and it allows everybody to kind of look at where do we want to look at India's place in the world. I'm not going to take too much time, but just because we have got a lot of speakers here who would contribute. But I was just reminded of what John Keane said a long time back. He said the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping from old ones.
I'd like to just begin by echoing what Ajay said. The PAFI annual meeting has just got bigger and bigger every year. I remember from jacaranda to, I think I discovered juniper and habitat thanks to Ajay and PAFI. And from there to these rather grand settings. So congratulations to all of you. So the modern trend of all these panel discussions is to have these rapid fire questions. And rapid fire Q&A session, but given the rather overarching theme of this morning's session, as well as the eclectic mix of speakers that we have, I think we're going to slow down a bit, and we're going to go the old-fashioned way of opening remarks. And everybody, so I'm going to ask every panelist to speak on where they think India's place in the world is going to be, the opportunities and challenges. And may I invite Irina to kick this off, please. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and a very good morning to everybody. Totally a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much, Ajay, and thanks, Javed, for teeing off the conversation as well. Now, when I look at where we are in the overall map of the world, and we did hear a few opening comments right when we started, I think a couple of things which really stand out, and we hear this in narratives over and over again. The opportunities lie in the way that we are connected digitally, having the largest ecosystem on the planet. The opportunity lies with the growth which is coming across for us. And when you look at the growth, it's not just the GDP growth, it's coming across in terms of the way the tech industry is contributing. A 245 billion with upwards of 8% growth is really, really profound. And on back of the growth, what also comes across is the skill, which we are contributing, the talent hub. The talent hub, not just from the way that we are contributing in the overall scale and things which are coming, but when you think of niched and nuanced things such as AI, the talent which is coming and contributing towards that, and India really, really leading the way. When you think about challenges, I would just kind of bring in the analogy of when you look at the glass, is it half empty or really half full? And to me, first of all, it's great to have a glass. Then it's always great to have a glass which you start from the way it is half full. And the opportunities come across by the way we can really create a difference from in reaching the last mile, the scale, because anything that you have to do in India needs to kind of defy the things of scale. The second is in terms of it having the way to communicate with everybody, towards the ability to speak everybody's language in a vernacular-led way. And the third, it has to be sustainable. So anything that we are doing, how does it kind of defy these things? Multiple examples in that nature, which is possibly for a little later time. But I would say that these are the 3 things which comprehensively define as to how India is coming and showing up. So India literally becomes the pilot test bed where you create these things and take it to different geographies and the world in the playing arena.
May I ask Ashish now for his comments?
Sure. Thank you, Javed. I think we're poised at a very interesting juncture. I mean, the last 25, 30, 40 years have really belonged to China. And in the next 25 years, it's really India and ASEAN that are best positioned as we go forward. I think there's lots of opportunities, but there are a few areas where we absolutely have to win if we want to realize that dream. The first is exports. We often delude ourselves by thinking that India is a large market, but I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that today it's still a $3.5 trillion economy, and the world economy is almost 30 times larger than us. So every country that's grown rapidly has grown on the back of exports. Because the world market is much larger than the home market, it also makes you sharper, more competitive, etc. We are right now 2% of goods exports. I think our aspiration clearly by 2030 should be to get to 5% of goods exports, and by 2040 to get to 10 to 12% of goods exports. And to do that, I think we need to put this into mission mode. I mean, clearly, Make in India is starting to happen, but much more needs to be done holistically so that we can win in electronics, garments, home interiors, toys, every category, pharma, chemicals, etc. Much larger global market share. And I don't think we have the focus today that it takes to get to the 5% and the 10% global market share that I was alluding to earlier. I think services, the engine is humming. Government needs to do less, although to go beyond IT, BPO, there's a need for certifications, normalization of that globally as we look at other services. But beyond that, I think we are doing extremely well, and we're very well poised to continue to grow market share. There are some risks, of course, in terms of AI eating into some of the existing revenue streams or jobs that exist on the service export. So exports is one. I think we have to prioritize exports, and particularly labor-intensive exports, because lots of jobs will get created through labor-intensive exports, and the supply chain will come with that. Second is investment. Investment really has been in the low 30s as a percent of GDP. We peaked at about 40%. It's got to get back up to 40%. The good news is that our infra investment has gone up dramatically. I think it's about 9% of GDP today. It needs to hang around 10% of GDP going forward. But overall investment really needs to go up. Private sector needs to invest much more. We need to build more housing stock in the country. And I think that while we're doing well in some areas, like rail and roads have obviously gotten undue attention, a portion of the budget, ports, airports, the private sector is doing very well. But some areas like urban infra are still woefully underinvested, neglected, and I think it'll take lots of money and lots of imagination to improve urban infra. And we need to start looking at urban not just from a lens of quality of living, but engines of economic growth. And I think if you frame it that way, you end up investing much more in infrastructure. We also need our infrastructure to really make India win in manufacturing. So whatever it takes, in terms of the asset creation, lowering logistics costs, which our minister has been talking about, etc. The third one is SME. SME is a huge engine for job creation. Now, there'll always be a long tail, but even amongst the 60 million, there are 3, 4, 5 million that really can grow rapidly, create jobs. I think credit is going to start to flow. I do think most countries have had a very robust credit guarantee mechanism provided by government. China, Japan, Korea, you name it, Vietnam. I think India needs to look at something like that. And obviously stronger market linkage, building the capacity of these SMEs. I think we need a concerted effort for these 2-3 million SMEs that really can create jobs. It's not, the 50 million are not going to do it, the nanopreneurs, but I do think there's a segment that really merits attention, policy attention, etc. And the fourth and final one I'll point to is R&D. We need to move up the value chain while we're doing all of this. India is a large economy, and we can't just be doing the basic stuff. Most countries started to invest significantly in R&D when they went from lower middle income to upper middle income. India is at lower middle income, 2,500 per capita. If you look at the data for Korea, over a 30-year period, Korea's R&D, corporate R&D went up 1,000x. 1,000x over 30 years. In China's case, it went up 100x over 20 years, between 2000 and 2020. And India's corporate R&D today is only $10 billion in aggregate. It really needs to go up many-fold, like 40 or 50-fold in the next 20 years. What is government doing to stimulate that? What are the incentives, the policies? What's the corporate sector doing? to partner with academia, to find ways really, what are boards doing to push corporates in that direction? Again, I think it will require a lot of imagination for us to really move up the value chain. So those are four things that I would point to: exports, investment, SME, and R&D.
Thanks, Ashish, as always, very comprehensive and realistic. Karthik?
Thank you, thank you. I think I'll build a bit upon what Irina and Ashish have been speaking about, but I will do it in the context of something more fundamental for all of us. In the past 60 years, humanity has been very successful, not just in reproducing itself, but also producing enough to feed itself. Today, there are large pockets of surplus in food in various parts of the world. However, a lot of it is getting lost along the way. If the surplus was matched with actual demand and we were able to streamline food supply chains, then humanity would strengthen itself in the medium term. This will also lay the foundation for a longer term problem that's about to hit all of us, and where India will play a pivotal and central role, which is climate uncertainty and the impending food shortage, where surplus turns into shortfall because of the climate emergency. Today, like I said, India is a very large producer of food, number one or number two in most categories, and many countries have food surpluses. A 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in climate, in average temperature is inevitable. We can discuss about what the root causes are. There's a lot of debate on it, but the direction is very clear. At 1.5 degrees Celsius, a lot of arable land globally becomes arid. And consequently, the dependence on pockets of agroclimatic zones where it is still cultivable becomes very high. And in a way, India is fortunate that we will still have quite a few pockets of agroclimatic zones where multiple types of cropping is possible. If, of course, the temperatures go up to 3 degrees Celsius, some of the simulations that I have seen suggest that we are all quite literally and figuratively toast. But having said that, I think there's a lot of effort underway to keep it at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And if India can preserve one of its greatest wealth elements, which is its soil and its percentage of arable land, and apply a combination of precision, technology, and tradition, which we've always had, I believe that India can show the way for humanity to survive by generating adequate food despite the climate shifts. We will, to touch upon what Ashish pointed out, we will export not just product, but also practices. The product itself will come because we have pretty much all the agroclimatic zones required to feed all of humanity in the country. And with tweaks to seeds, tweaks to practices, learning from our past, as well as applying technology, which Irina was referring to, we believe that it's possible to feed the world. Second, as Irina pointed out, we are a test bed for technology. We are a test bed for new learnings. If we solve for our supply chains, the learnings can also be exported for various countries and agroclimatic zones to solve for their supply chains. I believe therein lies the challenge as well as the opportunity. The challenge is to make sure that we do the right things at the right time. We leapfrog some of the learnings that other civilizations have been through and make sure we have enough for ourselves first. The opportunity is that if we solve for this, we believe that we can solve for the world. And the theme of Vishwaguru becomes really true. For the past 400 years, frankly, the narrative has been shaped by people who believe that nature exists for the pleasure of humans. We're the only civilization left that still believes that humans exist at the pleasure of nature. I think if we leverage that intrinsic belief with technology, we have a great future ahead. We will create a large number of jobs. We will create labor usage, and we will protect humanity from driving itself to extinction.
So I think largely the other speakers have talked about what are the key points in terms of India's growth. I think I'm also going to point out a fact that when we're talking about India, India is a 2080 country. 20% of the country spends almost 80% of all digital, financial, all services. And one of the challenges and opportunities for us is how do you get the remaining 80% to spend on financial inclusion, on services, how do you get them access to all these opportunities and services? I mean, in context of even getting, and we saw that during even COVID, the importance of things like social security. So, give you statistics. OECD countries spend about 30% of their GDP on an average on social security. India spends 10%. At an absolute number, that's still getting bigger as we are becoming a bigger economy. But we still have large pockets of the country where there is very little in terms of insurance, loans, digital literacy, financial access. It's like I was a teacher 12 years back in a government school. So we were taught a concept called differentiation in learning. And it's a concept where we are seeing that while we are leapfrogging on AI and technologies, there is a huge part of the classroom, huge part of the country which is stuck there. Nobody's waiting. Nobody's waiting and letting the other people to come and catch up. So we need to be very conscious of that. There is, like I said, there's going to be, I think, how do we build for a more inclusive country in India? How do we get more inclusive? Because a lot of challenges, there are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of innovations that are coming up. But who are they catering to? How are we making it more inclusive? How are we bringing it to the last mile? And how are we developing those last mile solutions is going to be very important. Otherwise, there are already challenges where in cities and in pockets there is some brilliance in all kinds of solutions, and then there is a lot of unhappiness or there is a lot of lack of access to resources. We are still talking about a country where 45% people do not have smartphones, out of which about 70% in a household women don't have smartphones. The internet subscription is about 900 million, but we still have a lot of people who have two phone connections or three phone connections. So it's both an opportunity and a challenge. And in all solutions, I think we need to start working very closely with folks who are working at the last mile, and also pushing on this aspect of government and corporate spending on things like financial inclusion, social security, last mile access, because this is not as typically in policy or other aspects that we term as CSR or corporate social responsibility, is actually market building. India will export a lot, and I think I agree, but India is also a massive consumption economy in itself. And Indians only consume, like you look at all platforms, digital or otherwise. Recently some numbers had come up which said it was going around in WhatsApp and all where that India has a 50 crore OTT market or users, which it seems quite not so much aligned to what we are seeing, but there is this huge opportunity. Even in these crores of numbers, we're talking about a country which is going to be soon 150 crore in population. So even if that number was true, I'm just taking OTT as an example, we still have only 1/3 of the country which is subscribed on a thing like OTT. How do you build for India as a consumption economy, getting them to consume and building the kind of both the guardrails and kind of spending on that, both from a government and economy perspective?
Ashish, are we going to live in a more deglobalized world, and what implications will that have for India?
I don't think it's going to be deglobalized. I doubt if we look at the world 10 years from now, trade is going to be lower than where it is today. So trade will still maybe at a slightly slower pace. It'll definitely be a more fragmented world, divided most likely into two spheres. And India may be at the intersection of those two spheres. But I think we can benefit from the fact that the largest importers are still in the Western world. America, UK, etc. And if they're shifting away from China, it's a huge opportunity for us. I was mentioning earlier, with labor-intensive exports, China has 30 to 50% global market share. Almost every labor-intensive export. India is at about 2%, 3%. So there's a golden opportunity because it's no longer China plus one. I think eventually the Western world will realize they have to evacuate China. You're seeing it with investments. Wherever people own listed equities, they're getting the hell out of China, Western investors. Wherever they have private investments, they're stuck. But as they can monetize, they'll get out. When you have, FDI in the ground and you have China as a market, it's very hard to leave China. But China is going to make it harder and harder for Western companies, and they will start to diversify. But longer term, I think they'll realize it's sort of insufferable. being in China. And I think that's a huge opportunity. Whether we get to that end state or not, even in the interim, there's a huge opportunity. I have a slight difference of opinion with Aniket, even though I know him very well for a long period of time, in that I do think that inclusion is important. We need the social protection, etc. But I don't think we can overdo it. Honestly, I think ultimately the only way you make the bottom 80% consumers is through structural transformation, is through creating jobs, getting people out of agriculture into manufacturing and services, and that is through making investment, whether it's in human capital, physical infrastructure, creating more jobs, etc. China didn't lift 800, 900 million people out of poverty through social inclusion. It really did so through creating jobs and through investment. So not to say that we shouldn't do it. Of course, the bottom needs some degree of protection. But I think we have inadequate focus, frankly, on structure. Ask one state in India whether they even measure structural transformation, which is to look at what percent of the labor force every year is being pulled out of agriculture and you're creating jobs in services and manufacturing. That ultimately is the marker of success of development, right? Every developed economy has 5%, 2% of the labor force in agriculture. Even places like Thailand, they're now in the low teens. India is still at 45%. So I think that's what we need to really focus on, and exports will be a key element, but so will the local market in making that happen. Exports is just, it's the engine that pulls the wagons often, and that's why it's so, so important.
No, I think largely, I think what we overdo, I agree, is the political aspect of social protection, which is the narrative that gets built, especially around elections or freebies. Every state, I mean, every woman in every state soon is going to get 1,000 rupees a month. That's going to be announced. That is being announced right now, whether the thought process is behind it or not. What the fact is that 80% of social security is what, in fact, Ashish mentioned earlier, the credit-linked guarantee schemes, which we need, like the PM Swanidhi, Mudra loan. We're talking about right now the Vishwakarma scheme, which gets a certain amount of loan. I think the narrative around social security is definitely an issue. But I think over the 22 lakh crores that we budget for social security, actually 82 or 85% is subventions and credit schemes. But 20% is direct cash transfer. We definitely, I think, need more impetus on such kind of government programs which are promoting SMEs, small businesses, getting credit, no collateral credit essentially in the hands of small businesses, farmers, SHGs, FPOs, and that's happening. That needs a lot more focus. I think a large part of what we overdo on social security is largely political and around elections, and that's a fact. Because all government schemes, for example, are the manifesto of political parties. So once it gets signed off, you have to implement it. But we definitely need more alignment with how do we grow some of the businesses, and like I said, some examples in terms of these schemes, they have been very effective, especially schemes like Mudra and others for small businesses in getting them very low interest loans without any collateral. That needs to really double down.
I think this whole taking advantage of the China opportunity is, a lot of it will depend on how successful we are in implementing supply chains of huge scale. Where do you think India is positioned in that?
I think we are in a transition phase when it comes to large supply chains. There are well-evolved industries like the automotive industry, which pretty much work similarly to elsewhere. But equally, there are large, components of the economy that are still operating at fairly high levels of inefficiency. And typically, we measure in supply chain the trade-off between efficiency and responsiveness. And when we apply technology and automation to these supply chains, then we are able to push out the efficiency frontier, which means you are able to achieve better efficiency while getting better responsiveness. If you don't do that, it's a trade-off of one against the other. The food supply chain, for example, today is still having that trade-off of efficiency versus responsiveness. And that is seen in the form of food loss. 14.7% of fruit and vegetable is lost between the farm gate and the retail point. And it is also seen in the form of food price volatility, which is what we experience with tomato. And this is the 12th such cycle I have seen ever since I entered this industry. By building a direct demand-led supply chain, using technology to predict what demand will be, and Over time, it will not happen overnight, but will happen over time. Align production to demand. It is possible to shift the efficiency frontier over here, make it more efficient while being more responsive. We've seen pockets of success in certain commodities, wherein the farmers today are planning their crop in quarter-acre plots, planted every week, in line with demand. What they realize is that they're hedging their average price realization and actually making more money in the process. And they're not falling prey to the narrative at the mandi. Today, the problem is that actually demand is completely inelastic, and it has become aseasonal as well. Supply is where volatility is coming in, because of course you have climate, you have seasonality, but you also have a lowered arrival at a mandi being interpreted as excessive demand, and consequently everybody around that mandi going and overplanting, which is what happened in tomato. And everybody retreats when there is a surplus, and consequently the prices go up. This is the bullwhip effect. So the bullwhip effect is very much prevalent in unorganized supply chains, and many of our supply chains still remain unorganized. Three enablers have come in that make it possible to transform this. Firstly, our roads are better. More than, of course, our national highways are very good, but the Gram Sadak Yojana is an unsung hero in this project. I'm able to reach the farm with a truck. The same farm I used to have a mule to go the last 20 kilometers to pick up avocado. That's the big enabler. The second enabler is democratization of information access, which we all know about. And the third, again, relatively unsung enabler in this category is the digitization of money. A corporate entity like us cannot operate on cash. Any corporate entity needs to operate digitally. And that has been enabled at near zero cost. It's now up to all of us to build layers of supply chain solutions on these three enablers. Supply chain is essentially material, information, and money. All three have been enabled, and we now have to reimagine supply chains. And today we know about our logistics costs. It's at about 12 to 14%. That needs to be deflated to about 6 to 7%. The enablers are in place. Now the companies and corporates need to step forward and make sure that they're using these enablers. We're trying to do that in food, and I'm sure there are other corporates that are trying it in other.
So no discussion about the future can happen without AI. So where, Irina, do you think India is poised on the AI front, and how well poised are we to sort of ride this wave?
Thank you for checking that out. And I've been in Microsoft for more than 2 decades, and I can just say that this is the most exciting phase of the entire industry, globally for us in India as well. When you think about AI, it isn't something which has happened of the offing as of now. It was always there. So even in the last as many years, when you were going across after the internet boom, you were getting recommendation engines, you were getting people kind of creating certain things which is leveraging the power. But having said that, the cusp which has come right now is the entire transformation which is led by generative AI. And I think that's where there is a transformational and a trajectory which will be taking a much steeper growth. Now, all of us here, I'm sure, would have been associated by the power of it in some form or the other. Now, where it trickles down across for what we can do in India is going across to the last mile that I was talking about. And I'll give you a few examples. Karthik talked about the democratization of internet services. Now, internet services are aplenty. But having said that, is it really reaching the last mile for them to be aware of it and take the usage of it in a manner that is envisioned by the government, right? So there's a project that we've done along with AI for Bharat, Jugalbandi, which kind of ensured that when you speak across in a language of your choice and preference, literally in rural India, and ask a question, something as simple, ye yojana yahan pe uplabdh hai ki nahi? That getting translated across to English, going across to the repository of large language model, fed across by not just of that particular state, but whatever is available pan-India, and making that available in a real time back in an audio format so that the last mile person really understands it. Similarly, when we talk about in the world of what we're doing, say in agriculture, ensuring that technology is kind of bridging that last real-time issues by taking care of the crop seeding, the climate-led ways that things have to be taken care of, or bridging the digital access in education, That's where the power of AI is coming by. Simple examples like a lot of here might be taking the usage of, say, Make My Trip. Now, how do we kind of ensure that you're asking questions but personalized across for you in the language that you understand? And I think the power of what we are doing across via AI in India comes across by the fact that you will have a lot, many ways of experimentation, a lot, many ways of diverse demographic groups which have unique challenges out here. So you will be kind of thrown across to experiment to solve those last mile challenges. And once you're able to do that, the way to scale it out will be that much more simpler because the challenges are unique, but the ways to solve for that, frankly, because we've traversed the entire economic and demographic divide journey by the power of scale via technology, we know how to do it. So the other things that I would say is that where it comes across very powerful is the power of the partnerships, power of working across in a public-private led mode towards ensuring that it becomes a lot more inclusive. And thirdly, ensuring that you've got a lot of ISV ecosystem, which is kind of creating and being entrepreneurial in that area. India really is way ahead in that, and the power of talent, the startup ecosystem, and entrepreneurship comes across very handy in that.
Irena, the concerns regarding AI, what are the guardrails that you think should be set up to sort of ensure protection against the misuse of AI as some people fear?
Absolutely. And like any other way that we kind of think about technology, the pitfalls have to be thought about not as an after the fact, but when you're building it, right? So very recently, we kind of put across, along with the governments, the AI blueprint, as we call it. Now, it has 5 pillars. The first one is to say, when you're creating this entire AI journey, do it alongside the government with what is required as the law of the land. The second is towards ensuring that you build it very, very closely along with the corporates in a public-private partnership mode. The third is towards saying that how can you have a very, very high level of transparency, which can be built in, towards ensuring that whatever you're thinking across when you're creating it is shared across so that people know as to what goes behind from security, compliance, privacy, everything which is out there. The next is towards putting guardrails. And how do we kind of think about putting guardrails that at various points of times, what are those milestones and checkpoints? If this, then what? And thinking about it way ahead and implementing those. And lastly, ensuring that we are learning in this journey together. Because it's not something that we know at this point of time, we know only as much as is available to us. And this will be an ever evolving journey. So how do you create an ecosystem which is kind of sensing things and then acting really ahead of the curve?
Aniket, how does India leverage DPI better, and how do you see India exporting DPI to the rest of the world?
I think in terms of the digital public infrastructure, DPGs, India has been at the forefront in innovation. We've invested, I think we're reaping the benefits of investments over 15 years back in formulating the laws and also working on Aadhaar. Look at the entire trinity of Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile as well. I mean, UPI is the poster girl of digital public infrastructure across the world, I would say. I think, but we also look at like the goods that have been built on things like DigiLocker, right, and documentation. So when COVID happened, the entire COVID certification was built on, is another example of a digital public good. So I think right now, in the context of innovation, like Ira mentioned, Jugalbandi, government has built Bhashini, similar speech-to-text, local language tools. So I think there is immense potential, and that will come a lot as AI systems intelligently become more and more intelligent with data, essentially. Right? So then more and more innovation will come. We still haven't unlocked the innovation of tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. I feel in this space, we're still building the goods which are going top down, and a lot of these are examples where scale can happen. So I think we are doing some fantastic work, I feel, as a country on solving problems using open digital public infrastructure, making digital public goods. There is huge potential of collaboration across the world. Because if you can solve for India, the narrative usually is then you can solve for global south. And I think that's something that we are already seeing, again, payments as the champion, but also in terms of documentation, creating digitally identified documents. There was a news that had come out recently that birth certificate now will be allowed as the single document where you can use it as an identity. But birth certificate is one of those challenges where mostly people do not have that. So there is, if you can store your birth certificate as an example on your DigiLocker, you can actually would not need to go and apply for again and again for documents, which is a huge challenge for getting any kind of government benefit, even if you have to apply for a financial services from a MFI or NBFC. That's a great example of how a policy push from the government can now potentially enable, creating digitally identified identities. And similarly, I mean, another example would be where we were pushed to think at the time of COVID of a one nation, one ration card. If you'll go back, it was actually pushed in the parliament way back in 2006-07. Never got passed. It always had challenges. COVID happened, we saw people going back to the villages hungry, and we launched it. And today that's become again a very easy tool to track. And you can today go and get your ration card made anywhere in the country and use it. So some of these things are examples of Indian problems where we are innovating, but has huge potential to take it to entirely to the world, and especially global south. They have similar problems.
Ashish, the world is excited about India's demographic dividend. But I mean, given the fact that you work in the field both of education and skills, how do you think that the demographic dividend is all that it is made out to be?
So I think with education, I think as all of you know, we do have a challenge, and learning does break down quite early in India. The World Bank has this indicator called learning poverty, which is children in class 5 who can't read third grade text, and 55% of children in India are learning poor, and then they fall behind forever. So this is really the bottom half that then falls behind forever. Government now has a mission called Nipun Bharat, where there's a concerted effort to work on this, particularly in grades 1, 2, and 3. But we've got a long ways to go. I mean, even a country like Vietnam, which is a competitor economically, is at 15% learning poverty versus 55%. And our best state, Kerala, is at 15%. So we really need to get to best in class within India if we want to get our education level to a certain point. Having said that, I still think, Javed, that our bigger problem is, skilling is important. I think the bigger problem is the demand side. It's more, how do we create more jobs? And I think supply reacts to demand. In a vacuum, creating supply doesn't necessarily stimulate demand. So I still think our policy framework, our attention really needs to be on how do we make more investments, how do we create the right policies so that more jobs are created, how do we get credit to flow, etc. That's why I was pointing out this labor-intensive exports or even labor-intensive manufacturing within India, or the SME sector, again, very labor-intensive where jobs can get created, credit flowing to those areas. I still think that's the bigger issue. You crack that and the supply side will solve for itself very, very quickly. I mean, again, I think female labor force participation, there are various reasons why it's low, some of it relating to social norms. But we know social norms have changed over time, and yet the female labor force participation is persistently low, may have even declined for a period of time before perking up. And I think a big reason actually is that we're not creating enough jobs. And enough women-friendly jobs, to be honest. And some of our laws are regressive. They don't allow women to work a second shift, et cetera, et cetera. So I think demand is the main problem, if you ask me. And education, of course, we need to fix, starting, go upstream and work on it. But even irregardless of that, I think if we had more demand, because there is such basic jobs, I do think the skilling can happen pretty quickly.
Karthik, rural demand is a mirage that everyone has been chasing for years and decades. When do you think rural demand and rural consumption will become a key driver of the Indian economy? Because without that, the Indian economy will never fulfill its potential.
I think for rural demand to scale, they should start earning first. And consequently, creation of more production opportunities in rural areas and therefore generation of income in rural areas will be necessary for rural demand to take off. It's not that there is no demand, it's just that the demand is not statistically captured, and it usually happens through subsistence fulfillment or unbranded, unorganized fulfillment. What will happen over time is that as value addition moves out of the cities and closer to urban or rural centers, we will see the creation of more income. We will also see the formalization of the rural cycles. And consequently, what subsistence today will become productized, branded, and so on. Further, we will see an increase in consumption as well. I think the key issue, therefore, to resolve is how do you create more value in rural areas? How do you get the rural economies to create more value? It could be manufacturing, it could be tourism, it could be food processing, it could be offsetting of food products through storage systems, etc. But those are the next set of initiatives to be done for us to eventually trigger rural demand.
Irina, ease of doing business, how big an impediment is that still to India investment, to investment in India?
I was just hearing this in one of the other narratives. It was there, but things are way, way better right now. Because if you just look at the quantum of the FDI investments which have happened, in the last couple of years, and the statistics were that whatever had happened in 2 decades has happened across in the last 2 years. So that clearly kind of shows that it has become a lot more simpler, but more importantly, the intent to make it simpler is what matters. And I think towards that, how the entire ecosystem is coming together towards making that investment happen in a much more simpler manner is manifesting itself in the way things are happening in a much more progressive manner across various sectors, across the way the global companies are also coming across and setting things across. That shows up.
Niket, what about ease for the common man? Where are we on that?
I think, I think another point was that the democratization of information is already happening. So I think we're using technology. There is the ease of information that is there, easily accessible. And we ourselves are registered as a startup. I think there is ease of setting up a business in India. Ease of running a business in India, not so sure. I think as a young organization, at least I can say this, that it's not the easiest place to run a business. I think it's even as a small organization, you have to set up. And I'm taking our example because I want to then go down to like a really micro entrepreneur and imagine that is this a challenge? Is this like an impediment to grow? Because the bigger you become, the more departments you have to set up in the organization for compliance. So I think that's a reality. And I think, but yes, I think setting up today in business are for the common person also, even if you are, I think there are fantastic investments that the government has made over the last 2 decades, various governments like NRLM, National Rural Livelihood Mission, we have 100 million women members. Any last mile business today piggybacks on that business. We have fantastic last mile banking correspondent networks. We have great micro and nano entrepreneurs, we have FPOs, we have SHGs, we have government programs and financial linkages for them. So I think today if you are an entrepreneur at any level, India is one of the best opportunities to set up. Like I said, after that to grow and then to sustain and scale, and that's why you will see we have statistically, I think 93 million MSMEs, all kinds, but any business which is over 100 crores is probably not even 100,000. So that's very interesting, right? Like that ratio is so huge that over the years that 60 has gone to 80 to 93 million. But those businesses who are really at any level or any kind of enterprise doing well are smaller, and one of the things could be that it's just not like for family businesses or small businesses, it's not attractive enough to grow that big as an organization.
Ashish, how does the world see India? Both the positives as well as the negatives.
Look, I think we all know that our place in the world has changed and people see us in a much more positive light than before. One is our size. I mean, we are much more meaningful. I mean, today, if you're a global company, you know you can build a multi-billion-dollar business in India. You know you can, it's still not huge, but you can start to turn the needle on your global revenues. Not quite China, what China was, but you can imagine that in 10 years it'll be much larger, but even today it's 2, 3, 4% of global revenue. So I think it's important. From an investor standpoint, it's important, equity market investor, because India has been a stable place. In the emerging world, it's a shining star. We haven't defaulted on our sovereign debt since independence. We have outperformed almost every other market. I mean, if you look at the returns over the last 30 years, India and the US really stand out in terms of equity returns. So people think of India as a good investment destination, stable place, unlike Latin America where there's boom bust, and Africa where there's coups and all kinds of unpredictable events. I think India, ASEAN are two places that really stand out, is my sense. In terms of improvement areas, I think there's a few. I mean, one is, I think, just the mindset of, this ease of doing business we're talking about. I think we need to move from a red tape mindset to a red carpet mindset. I mean, at the end of the day, what's the role of government? It is to take care of the bottom half, the bottom 50, 60%, which I think we're doing a much better job now in terms of whether it's getting them a bank account or basic services. And now we need to move into education, health, which are yet to improve dramatically. But some of the other basic infra has improved. And the other role of government is really to be a facilitator and coordinator for the private sector and for growth and for business. On that front, I mean, I still don't think we're as pro-business. I think there is some degree of suspicion, not to say that every businessman is clean. And obviously the bad ones need to be taken to task. But I think we need stability in the policy environment. We need to be pro-business in our mindset. I think what the Chinese got right is every mayor would roll out the red carpet for investment. Every county party chief would roll out the red carpet for investment. What the Vietnamese are getting right is when you go to Vietnam, they literally roll out the red carpet for you. And I think that is the change in mindset that we need. I mean, we're starting to see it, that in UP, the chief minister for the first time wants to attract investment. But I think we need an institutional structure to be able to support that. In Telangana, you have a minister who is very aggressive and will coordinate with secretaries and obviously has a local stand-eye to make things happen. In Tamil Nadu, there's a body like Guidance that can work closely with the industry minister, secretary, to push things and make things happen. So some of our states have it, but most of our states are not growth-oriented. I mean, Bihar, Bengal, the whole of the Northeast, even Rajasthan, which has a golden opportunity because it's sitting at the heart of the dedicated freight corridor. Where is the growth orientation? I mean, I understand people need to get re-elected, and so they care about the basic services. But really, the number one goal in any country should be to increase per capita income. And you're only going to increase per capita income through higher investment, higher exports, better productivity, creating jobs, etc. And those indicators are not on people's radar, whether it's at the political level or even at the bureaucratic level. Which chief secretary actually has this dashboard? Or which district magistrate has this in their KRAs, that they need to attract investment or create jobs? So I think that switch in mindset, that look, I need to deliver basic services, key priority, and that will get me re-elected. But I also have to really grow the pie. And I'll grow the pie by helping facilitate and coordinate and for the private sector, because it's the private sector that will really grow the GDP of this country, that will create jobs. I think the central government, that switch has been flicked to a great extent. At the state government level, I would say other than a few states, maybe 4 or 5, the progressive ones, I don't think it's happened. And even amongst the progressive ones, a lot more can be done. I think that's where we really need to change, in the coming years.
Thanks. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we now throw this open to the House. So if there are any questions, please please raise your hand, identify yourself, and go ahead and ask them. Yes, please.
Good morning. I'm Prashant Thuvij, and I lead public affairs for AP Moeller Maersk. A great panel one here, India's place. We've touched upon a lot of pertinent points, but geopolitics is one of those things that I would like to touch upon. It's a top enterprise risk, and large corporates, boardrooms are discussing this. I would like to hear reflections, opinions from the panelists on how is India's place today in a global geopolitical landscape. Thank you.
Who'd like to answer that? Ashish, would you like to take care of that?
I'll take a quick crack. I mean, I think, look, it is going to be a very tense moment geopolitically. I don't think Russia-Ukraine is getting sorted anytime soon. And clearly there's a risk that the Middle East situation escalates and drags in other actors and becomes worse. I think India still is a relatively safe haven in that context, because we played our cards well in terms of not aligning ourselves too closely with anyone, of being more of a somewhat neutral player. I mean, we are tilting in one direction, but we're still more neutral. And I don't think the Chinese may have done, I don't still understand why the skirmishes happened, and which was stupid on their part, because things were going better in India. But their real issues are elsewhere, not on the Himalayan border. So I think India is still geopolitically in a very turbulent world. India will still be a relatively safe haven as we go forward, and possibly will benefit from a turbulent geopolitical world. Like the China plus one is India benefiting from a geopolitically turbulent world, as opposed to suffering or being at the raw end of the stick.
One more, yeah, gentleman there first.
My name is Sunil Parekh from Zydus in Ahmedabad. As my colleague from Moeller said, that geopolitics is one aspect, but what about the climate change, which is the big elephant in the room? Where is India on this, and how will we shape up, given the constraints of the need to decarbonize and at the same time go green?
Karthik, will you take this?
Sure, thank you. I think this is a very critical question, sir. The fact remains that India is leapfrogging several generations when it comes to adopting technology, and therefore does not need to go through the same energy intensity journey of the carbon generation journey that the rest of the world does. However, the rest of the world is still not keeping its commitments. And consequently, the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase looks to be real. Therefore, while we have done a lot to mitigate our own impact on the climate, while continuing our growth journey, such as leapfrogging to electric vehicles, 95% of our railroad is electric, and we're increasing the percentage of regenerative power rather than depending on coal and so on. So we're doing the right things, different things at different pace. But the fact is, the shift in climate is not because of us. It is because of the external world. And consequently, we need to do more adaptation as well. We suffer from the fact we enjoy the largest arable land in the world, but if the weather does not permit the cultivation of the crops, we are in trouble. And consequently, newer seeds, more resilient varieties of cultivars would become necessary. Shift in cropping patterns, mapping out how agroclimatic zones will shift over the next few decades become necessary. I'm looking at it from my industry perspective. And these changes are now becoming necessary, and therefore climate adaptation needs to now start firing on all cylinders. That's the reality. I think in terms of mitigation, we will do our job, and naturally we are inclined towards that. And we have the opportunity to leapfrog. And the cost curves are also supporting that. Many of the newer technologies that are more climate friendly are actually cheaper than the other ones. But adaptation will become necessary because we will be an unwitting victim of what the rest of the world is doing. I'm being straight.
Yes, question. We'll go to the back first. There, yeah.
Hi, morning. Rahul Sharma, I head Public Affairs for BCW India Group. My question is for Aniket as well as for Ashish. You spoke extensively about the importance of MSMEs. And indeed, there are, I think, 93 million MSMEs in the country. From our experience, we've also seen that tax compliance in those MSMEs is also one of the reasons why MSMEs tend to grow in a certain manner, or perhaps have different models to achieve the reported income versus what's the actual income. How big of an issue is tax rate, tax compliance for MSMEs to achieve, for them to become really from small to major enterprise?
I think in terms of government schemes, majority of these 93 million are actually micro and nano. There is very little lack of awareness essentially to understand that why do you need a GST? You don't need to pay GST till your turnover is not over 20 lakhs. Most of these businesses actually do not have a turnover like street vendors, your solo entrepreneurs, nano entrepreneurs. But there is a fear that the moment we get a GST number, we'll be taxed. There is this mismatch and lack of awareness, because unless you get your Udyog Aadhaar, which is the business Aadhaar, and GST, the difference between getting credit can be as big as 20%. Let's say you're a street vendor and you can get your GST, you can get your Udyog Aadhaar, you can get your FSAI license. You're a street vendor outside an IT office. You can get interest at 8 to 9% on a government program, through a bank, through an NBFC. Whereas if you do not have these registrations, you will be mostly getting it at 18 to 24. But there is this, you can call it fear, or traditional understanding of just the narrative that has been built that the moment I get GST, I'll be taxed for 5 years, 10 years, which is actually not true, because like I said, the tax itself at a business level. Of course, if they've not reported money and have deliberately tried to fudge any kind of accounts, that's another challenge. But that kind of financial literacy is not there. We have modules also on literacy, which are how to use a smartphone, how to use an app, go through digital financial literacy modules when it happens through MSMEs or individuals. There is very little this kind of literacy that is out there, that why do you need this documentation? Because a lot of these businesses will actually not be able to afford a chartered accountant. So they will never go there. So.
Gentleman there.
Thank you, panelists, for a great discussion. I'm Rakesh with Carlyle. Question, and particularly I would like Ashish to weigh in on this. So welfareism and suspicion of business, which Irina talked about, are embedded in our socialist legacy. That gets set very early, primarily through the social mores and the school curricula. How do we actually promote economic literacy early on and also in the masses, that the populist measures of today are actually going to extract a very heavy price for future generations, and maybe in a medium term for many of us even now? So does anyone talk about it? How do we really change the narrative on that?
A quick response. I don't know how we'll get the masses, and frankly, in countries that are much better educated, more advanced, you still have populist policies. So anything that appeals to a large majority, whether it financially makes sense or not, often is something that the political class will want to dabble with. I think at the end of the day, it's about getting our elites to realize that, look, at the end of the day, we want our country, irregardless of political party. I think they want, of course, to get re-elected, but they also want the pie to grow. And so getting them to understand what it will take to get the pie to grow is very important. I think this switch that's come even in the central government, I don't know who to thank, whether it's the finance secretary or Mr. Somanathan or whoever, that look, he in fact was quoted saying, he quoted a research study saying that every rupee that goes into infrastructure gets me 3 rupees in return ultimately, versus into populist schemes or even direct transfer gets you only 0.9. Right? And that was his logic to take the 3.3 lakh to 10 lakh crore. That is really the elites coming to the realization that we need to grow the pie, we need to invest, and this is the pathway to sort of getting there. So I would focus more on the elites as opposed to getting the masses to understand this, because I still don't think that our political class or bureaucratic class are there as yet. And if we can get them to understand this, which I think they will, we will progress much faster.
The gentleman sitting right at the back here.
My name is Sudarshan. I'm the Dean of the General School of Government and Public Policy. One of the panelists made a reference to the need to create non-farm employment opportunities in rural India. And that's very important because China did that with its town and village enterprises decades ago. We must pay a tribute to Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, who passed away recently. In the 90s, his research foundation identified 15 agroecological zones in this country and identified opportunities for non-farm but farm-based employment, and persuaded Dr. Manmohan Singh to create something called the Small Farmer Agribusiness Consortium. I believe there is still an office in Delhi and an officer appointed to the Small Farmer Agribusiness Consortium, but nothing has happened on the ground. So I wonder, where is the source of optimism that, when the 90s, this initiative was heralded in his budget speech by the finance minister, and subsequently nothing has happened. So how are we to be optimistic that this transformation in rural India can indeed occur?
The SFAC, as you are referring to, sir, is the entity that's now driving the creation of farmer-producer cooperatives. It's a long lead activity, and it has taken its time to come into being. And the farmer-producer cooperatives, I'm sure Aniket will add to this, are finding their feet as we speak. So that's just one direction by which we generate, non-farm income in the farm areas. We're also seeing a lot of private enterprise driving this in parts of the country, especially in Tamil Nadu, for example, by creating a network of poultry suppliers amongst the farmers, by setting up processing units, for example, for starch near the production zones of tapioca, etc. We're starting to see some movements. One hopes that the recent PLI announcements in the food processing sector, etc., will add to this. I think private enterprise has a role to play in driving this, in addition to, of course, the government initiatives. It's a longer lead activity for sure, because trust gets built over time. And it took quite some time for us to get the FPOs off the ground, and now they're starting to build some momentum. The FPOs are now thinking about value addition. For example, there are FPOs that have set up dal mills and are trying to process that. They suffer a problem of market linkage. And their companies like us are trying to step in and bridge that market linkage. So it's a cycle that's taking longer. But I think enterprise will find its way if allowed to.
So I'm afraid we've run out of time, although
can I have the last question, please? Here.
Okay, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Subrat. I am from Indian School of Public Policy. Javed talked about the example of China and Vietnam, how they are giving red carpet welcome to investors. They have a plug-and-play approach, which India also tried to have in form of special economic zones, but they didn't work out somehow. Can you give us short analysis why Indian special economic zones didn't work out and what we can do better?
Actually, Ashish had said that, so I'll hand it over to him. It's a question that can be answered in very long words. I'm asking Ashish to answer in 20 seconds. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll say very quickly, look, ICZs didn't work for a variety of reasons. One of which is, I think if you really want it to work, there's a certain scale and size, and then there's also a certain authority that needs to rest with the special economic zone so that you can give multiple clearances all at once. You're authorized to actually do that, and we didn't do that in a sense. It was yet another industrial park, is what the SEZs were. So but having said that, even if we don't have SEZs, I do think that we have a phenomenal opportunity to grow, because people are finding, as long as the state can help procure land and make some of these even medium-scale industrial parks available, and roll out the red carpet for business. So rolling out the red carpet wasn't just a function of SEZs. SEZs provided the jurisdiction and made it easier and provided the scale. But I think we can do it even if our SEZ policy has failed.
Thanks. We'll really have to wrap it up. Can I ask Vivek to vote of thanks, please?
Thank you, Javed. Friends, first of all, good morning and thanks for taking out time early morning to be there with us for AFI's 10th Annual Forum. I take this opportunity to thank my phenomenal panelists, Karthik, Ashish, Irina and Aniket, and Javed for being an excellent moderator, KSV for the welcome address and all. We had some exciting discussions, starting with Irina, who spoke about digital infrastructure, skills for the future, skills which actually increases the employability quotient for the country's youth. She also brought in sustainability element in her discussions and India being used as a test bed. I totally agree with her around ISV ecosystem and the startup ecosystem, she mentioned. Also, she stressed upon the public-private partnership, and many amongst us sitting here, with working for different organizations, especially in the tech space, we are partnering with the government on multiple issues, especially in this PPP mode, and this is what is going to be the success model in my opinion. Reena also mentioned about the challenges are, and they will always be unique, and I totally sort of agree with her. Moving to Ashish, I quite like the 4 pointers he mentioned about exports, increasing exports. No rocket science over there. We have to do that across sectors. He mentioned about investments in urban infra as an engine for economic growth. Which again is something, it is much needed. What I particularly liked about Ashish's initial comments was SMEs being a huge engine for job creation and the credit guarantee mechanism you spoke about. I think if as PAFI, we could work with the government to facilitate that, it's going to help our SME ecosystem and lakhs and lakhs of jobs getting created. Last point you mentioned was R&D moving up the value chain. And I'm really pleased that many colleagues sitting here, we have our large R&D centers all housed in country. So make in India for the world, not just hardware but also software and other technology elements. Karthik, streamlining, food supply chains, I think it's much needed. You spoke about democratization of internet services and how we can, link technology, for agriculture in particular. I mean, today, many government establishments, they are partnering with the private sector around use of AI to better get a better harvest. They're reading soil characteristics and leveraging technologies like AI across the length and breadth of the country for a better produce. Aniket, what I really liked, if you can solve it for India, you can solve it for the world. So I 100% agree with you. And you also mentioned about 20% of countries spend almost like 80% of the total spend, which is again, an eye-opener. You mentioned about some good economics concepts and all, making India more inclusive. And inclusion as a subject is really, really close to my heart. And many other friends, sitting here, whether it's, connecting the unconnected or, serving the underserved or underbanked communities and all, digital inclusion, financial inclusion. I think all of us in this room, we are doing our respective bit to make it an inclusive society. Summing up, I mean, it's no-brainer that time for India is now. Anyone who's someone across the globe, you pick up any sectors, the top 5, 7, 10 companies across sectors, they are already in India. They believe in India's story. So thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for your time and my excellent panelists. Thank you.